No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, this is the 4th episode in our 4-part series of leadership mistakes. Going back about 4 weeks now, we've talked about a lot of things, the mistakes that leaders make that aren't necessarily career-ending or career-stalling mistakes, but ones they could be making on a daily basis that just either slowly eats away at team cohesion or their credibility as a leader. You know, things that you can kind of turn on a dime if you want to and make strides to correct and rectify the situation and get your people back on board with you if they have started to be lost by you. If you have not listened to the last 3, please go back and do so. We have gotten a lot of positive feedback on this. And on this final episode of the 4, the thing that I want to talk about when it comes to leadership mistakes is one that is kind of near and dear to my heart, one that I kind of like wanted to save for the last episode here. And this is the concept of managing conflict effectively with your teams. I know a lot of leaders who are ineffective at managing conflict, and I go back to the if you're a fan of The Office, and it's probably my favorite comedy show of all time, the episode with where Michael Scott's talking about the different types of outcomes of the win-lose and the win-win-win, and how the solution was to pin the picture of the babies playing saxophones to Oscar's shirt so that he didn't have to look at it, but that Angela still could. And just this idea of conflict. How do you solve conflict on your team? And so, Lorenzo, the first thing I want to ask you is, have you ever had to solve a conflict on your team where there was no way to make everybody happy?
Absolutely, yes. Especially in kind of the industry, in regards to like retail, where you're dealing sometimes with situations where there's multiple ways to take care of a situation or take care of a customer, or multiple ways of, just getting things done.
Sure.
And people will tend to have very clear, standards or expectations of how things need to happen, and somebody else may have a different way of doing things. And so there's a lot of, right and wrong, when really it's just a matter of a difference of approach sometimes, or a different, perspective or perception of how something needs to get done effectively or efficiently. So, it happens quite a bit. And then
Right.
even, especially when it comes to, people also that are, we talk a lot about here, taking on more responsibility or continuing to take calculated risks by raising your hand for, different types of strategies, or owning certain things for a team where you're maybe stretching yourself, and you may be leaning too heavily into maybe your raw talent and not necessarily the ability to collaborate with people and effectively communicate with people. So there's just a lot of spaces where conflict happens quite often. Many times it shows up as kind of healthy debates. But then other times, it gets a little bit heavier than that.
I think back to the last episode that we did on these leadership mistakes, and the primary focus of that episode was the mistake of not taking emotions into account. And, I look at these as really closely tied together, because I don't think it's possible to have conflict without emotion. By definition, someone cares about something enough to have a conflict with you about it. That implies that they're emotional about it. And it doesn't mean they're wrong. This is not right or wrong here. This is just, if people are emotional about something and they have a difference of opinion, that's what conflict is. If one person was completely unemotional about it, then there wouldn't be a conflict, because that person would just say, oh yeah, whatever you want to do is fine. And then you would move forward with whatever that thing was here. But when it comes to managing conflict effectively, you're talking about things that are, by definition, subjective in nature. If it's objective, what that means is there's a company policy. And if there's a company policy, then you're not really having to manage conflict effectively. You're just literally having to parrot whatever the company policy is. And hopefully there's precedent set that say, hey, we stand behind this policy. This is clear what we're supposed to do here. These are situations where it is very subjective, because there isn't a policy. It is we agree on where we want to go, typically, just not how to get there. Sometimes it's we don't agree on where we want to go, but usually it's we don't agree on how to get there. And so one of the things that I try to do when I am trying to manage conflict amongst two people, if I've two people come to me and they have a difference of opinion on something, the thing that I have to think about is, one, I have to remove who they are from the situation. So I can't let any type of personal biases that I have towards one person or against another person get in the way, or that will allow me to, color my viewpoint on this or the direction that I go, if there isn't a clear answer, if really either way is fine. By removing who they are and kind of like just putting, A and B and looking at the opinions on paper without the people involved, a lot of times that can lend some clarity to it. But the other thing I think I try to do is just put the decision through the lens of my own personal values. Because if there's a clear right way forward, then you can let that be the grounding, right? You can say that this is the right way and this is what defines the right way. If there isn't a clear right way, meaning whatever you give as your decision as the leader is going to be subjective and is going to create a fan and is going to create a person who does not like your decision, then the person who doesn't like your decision needs to be able to say, well, I don't like their decision, but it falls in line with exactly what I expect of Chris because of the other decisions that he has made in the past. And that will at least strengthen my predictability as a leader. And therefore, I think my relationship with that person, even if they don't like the decision in the moment.
Yeah, I think another thing to remove outside of just the individuals with the conflict is also title.
Sure.
That's where I think a lot of times people get caught up, is thinking that because somebody holds a title that's different than somebody else, whether it's a reporting structure or different parts of the business or whatever the case is, that we then tend to feel like, well, the person with the quote-unquote highest title, is probably in the right here. And let me be the first one to tell you that's not always the case. And I think that, when those situations come up and they come to you to have to work through the conflict, I think there is a moment of just having to pause and get away from move away from the actual conflict and move into a space where what are we looking to get accomplished here? And stop the back and forth or to help to reduce or remove some of the emotion that's happening in the dialogue and pull it back to, like, what are we looking to accomplish? Like, is this about solving this situation for a customer? Is this about aligning on the expectations of a behavior? Is this about like first let's gain agreement, right? And I think once you can kind of gain agreement in the dialogue, then you can start to say, okay, now tell me your opinion. Now tell me your opinion of this. Okay, so are we talking about a different approach and opinion, or are we talking about a policy, or are we talking about an expectation? It's starting
Sure.
to break down the conversation into ways that allow you to have that level of dialogue. I think is critically important. And as a leader, this is the people business. These are the things that happen. And you want people on your team that are highly passionate. You want people with opinions based on experience. You want a lot of that to be able to move your business forward and make sure that you're consistently pushing the bar higher and innovating. But with that comes a good amount of conflict.
Right. I think back to some advice that I got a long time ago when it came to debate. I love debate when it's healthy and when it's respectful, and I think people can learn a lot if two people both enter a debate about anything with positive intent. And obviously, the more emotional one or both of them are, the less likely that is to remain. And we can see that in terms of the devolving of human beings over social media over the last 5 years can show that. But that doesn't mean there aren't pockets of where it still remains healthy and where people can still assume positive intent. But when I look at managing conflict, this is one of the lenses I put through it. And this advice that I got was that don't look at the person on the other side as your opponent. Look at the person on the other side as your teammate, and the opponent is whatever the wrong decision is, and the outcome or the goal is whatever the right decision is. So if you're debating something, then you are both on the same side trying to find whatever the truth is, and trying to cast aside whatever the wrong information is or the lies are. And there's something that kind of switches in my head personally when I stop looking at the person I'm talking to as my opponent and I start looking at them as my teammate. There's something about the assumptive positive intent about that person, about how I speak to them, the words that I use when I'm crafting the next thing that I'm going to say, and how I say it. I'm a lot less likely to be passive aggressive, a lot less likely to let little things go through, like the read between the line statements that you're not really saying, but you're saying and they can pick up on it. Those things don't happen when you're talking to a person who you view truly as your teammate and as your partner in trying to get to the answer or solve the problem together. And when it comes to managing conflict, I think this holds 100% true. If you're a leader and the conflict is between you and somebody else, it is 100% true. If you're trying to manage conflict between two people and you are not part of the conflict itself, then it becomes your responsibility as a leader to show both those people that statement, that they are on the same team together, and to show them that they can work together. Oftentimes what that means is that even though you've been brought in as the leader to solve the problem, the wrong thing is for you to solve it. The right thing is for them to solve it, because by definition, if they're able to solve it together, they're more likely to maintain a healthy relationship than if you just kind of like dole out whatever the way forward is.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. I think because what are you, as a leader, what are you either teaching or helping them to work through for future? And again, whether or not their conflict's going to lead to them having to kind of, work together with more intent to have less conflicts between the two individuals, or if you're teaching the skill of navigating conflict, it is not helpful as a leader in those situations to say, okay, all right, what's your side? All right, what's your side? All right, fine. Here's the decision, then get out of my face, right? Like, that's just not helpful, and that's not, you're not doing anything. And yes, there may be a clear answer. Yes, there may be something that you see that either the one of them has 100% correct, or both of them are wrong, or there may be a really quick, if this is what you want, here's the answer, go do this. But if you're not spending the time to reflect, if you're not asking the questions, if you're not helping them to see, like, how do you tone down, and how do you even in the midst of having a discussion, dialogue, debate, or conflict about something, what are the things that when you notice this is where it's going, how do you either stop it, slow it down, or exit out of it? All of those things are teachable skills that are helpful in a leader to be able to give you kind of a calm and a composed approach to the vast majority of things that happen.
The other thing that I think is important to remember too is that when it comes to conflict, oftentimes when you have been brought in as the leader, you might see the conflict that you're trying to solve as whatever the thing is in the moment, this particular debate or this decision or whatever. But if you've been brought in, a lot of times there's a lot underlying. There are a lot of emotions. There's a lot of history in the relationship between those two people that is not necessarily something that you see because one or both of them have kind of suppressed it. They've had these kind of tense interactions before. They've had these situations where one of them, pulls rank on the other before, and the other just kind of like bites their tongue and moves on, grumble, 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 and they go. By the time you get involved or you've been brought in, it might be that it's just it has bubbled over. And now you might see this particular conflict you're trying to solve as piddly, right? It means nothing in the greater scheme of things. It means everything in the greater scheme of things to these people because of the history that's underneath it. It's like it's like in a relationship when you get yelled at for doing the tiny thing and you're like, oh my gosh, this is such an overreaction. And then they start talking about how this isn't the first time, it was this time, all the history. It's like, well, I never knew about any of those times. You never said anything. You just kind of let them fester, and then all of a sudden the straw that broke the camel's back happened, and now all of a sudden I'm getting yelled at. Well, this is the exact same thing. A lot of these conflicts happen when they bubble over, not when it happens at the beginning. When it happens at the beginning, typically both people have a clear head. There's less emotion involved, and a lot of times they're able to work it out on their own. And I think when leaders ineffectively manage conflict, they are looking only at the surface as opposed to what is lying deeper. And that becomes even more of an issue where let's not just jump in and try to solve the issue on the surface. Let's make sure we can solve the deeper issue of where did the relationship break down, and how can we help these two people maintain a positive relationship? Because if neither is going anywhere, you're only going to just solidify the fact that you have to be involved in every decision between them going forward if all you do is solve this one, as opposed to helping them, get back to where they got off track.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Now, when it comes to like leaders, and so if there's a leader and an individual contributor having a conflict, my first gut will typically fall into like, well, that's usually because, as you always say, the relationship that it should be proactively engaged with by the leader is not in such a space where either there's grace on the employee side or the leader side, so that you can say, I made a mistake, or or get pushback in the moment, or have the relationship that allows there to be less conflict because somebody knows that there's good intent. Is there anything that you feel like beyond that relationship or building that trust over time, there's something else that can be helpful for leaders that may find themselves having more conflict than not?
Yeah, ego. I mean, at the end of the day, we see this everywhere. We see it in literally all aspects of society, where a wrong decision is made and the person is so fearful or prideful of saying I was wrong that they will double down and triple down and quadruple down and make the situation worse, to the point where it can become unrecoverable, either the relationship or even the job or the career, when the initial mistake, the underlying thing that happened, it is so small that they could have walked it back in the moment had they made that decision to. And if they had walked it back in the moment, what would have happened then? Well, if they walked it back, would that person who they had a bad relationship with been watched them do it and in their mind gone, oh, see, Mr. Perfect isn't Mr. Perfect, are they? And if you don't have a good relationship with your people, that might actually happen. But it doesn't matter. If you're the leader, it's your responsibility to put the actual decision and the way forward ahead of whatever your pride is telling you should do in that moment, and eat it. If it was the wrong decision, it was the wrong decision. And so I think a lot of the conversations I have with leaders where they get tripped up in this is truly just about putting their ego aside and not being prideful about something, being able to look at something in the context of, hey, if you could walk this back without anybody ever knowing it happened in the first place, would you? And if the answer is an emphatic yes, then walk it back. Walk it back. Go back and make a different decision and own it. You will come out off the other side a lot better than if you kind of dig your heels in and then eventually have to walk it back anyway. But now you've lost everyone.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 minute hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
The 1 minute hack.
All right, for this episode's 1 minute hack, here's what I want you to do. If you're a leader of people and you're trying to manage conflict between people on your team, you need to view yourself as a mediator more so than a decision maker. And what I mean by that is that if the decision to be made is very objective, it's a company policy, you have information that maybe they don't have, that's an easy one. It can be grounded in whatever that policy is. But in most situations where there's conflict, that's not the case. And so if you look at yourself as a decision maker, you are by definition going to create somebody who is happy with your decision and somebody who is not happy with your decision. So instead, don't put yourself in a situation where you are creating that. Instead, try to make it yourself the mediator to help the two of them work out the conflict on their own, even if it means you have to be in the room with them. Because if there's one thing I've seen is that you will hear the best side of each story from the person who is delivering it, and both of those sides will lead you to believe the other person is wrong, because people can sell things really, really well. Put yourself in the same room with people, help them work it out together, make sure that the two of them are assuming positive intent and they're treating each other with kindness and respect so they can work out their issue. And often you will see that they're able to work it out without you even having to get involved, besides just being that kind of third party in the room. It will do wonders for their relationship going forward, as opposed to you just making a decision or trusting that they're going to do it on their own and that one of them is going to be unhappy and let that kind of those negative feelings fester to potentially bubble up on a different day.
Yeah, I think it's a great 1 minute hack. And that part about respect is so critical. And if you feel that there's the opportunity to have a respectful conversation and be able to work through something, then that's the right time to have the conversation. If you feel that it's either at the point of already being disrespectful or that the emotions are too high at the moment, then there is sometimes an opportunity to have to separate and say, at this point, I don't believe that we can have a conversation that's going to help us solve this based upon the emotion or where we're currently at in this conflict. So I'm going to ask both of you to take a few minutes, and we're going to come back here respectfully as adults and have this conversation. So that's what I'm going to ask of you. Go ahead and take a minute, refresh, come back, so that we can have a respectful conversation. And sometimes you have to do that as a leader. So I think that's such an important part to then trying to find the solve, because that has happened and that will happen from time to time, where it's not the right time right now to have to work through the conflict of the situation. It may require you to make a decision in the moment, which you're going to have to make. But when it comes to solving the conflict and doing it the right way, also be conscious of those things.
Right. I saved my parenting reference for the end here. When my kids fight with each other, one of the things that we do as parents is when it's time for them to make up and start getting along again, we have them say to the other one and to us one thing that they love and appreciate about the other person. Now, when it comes to the work environment, be careful how you word this, but you can ask your people to think about something positive about the other and articulate it to them, something that they think the other person does well in their job. If they can't think of anything, then they're not looking, because if a person is wholly bad, they're not going to be there anymore. And so have them come up with something about the other person that they admire or that they appreciate or that they think that person does well, but don't put them on the spot to do it. Don't say, okay, come up with something now and say it when you're live in front of the other. This is one of those, hey, when we're going to take this breather, when you come back, I want you to be thinking about something about the other person that you enjoy or that you think that they do well in the organization or something to execute well, so that you can articulate that. Oftentimes, reframing that for each of those people and their mindset can at least start them out on the right foot to have the conversation you need to have.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.